Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis Rosa, and I'm your host. Today, I really have a very special guest, which is my wife, Alison. You've heard her before, may have not known that it was her. She's actually the voice in the introduction and the outro to the podcast. So welcome, Alison. It's super weird calling you by your first name, but we got to keep it professional.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me participate in your podcast today. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, the reason I have you on today is because you and I were talking about buying a property, and one of the reasons was because mortgage rates are so low right now. So I wanted to talk to people about why they're low and whether or not it makes sense for someone to either purchase a home now or refinance an existing mortgage.
Absolutely. And I think that this is a really hot topic right now. So I'm glad you're doing a podcast about it. So for those who aren't familiar with this topic, can you tell us a little bit about what the relationship between the stock market and mortgage rates are?
So there is no direct link between the stock market and mortgage rates. However, there is more of a direct relationship between the bond market and mortgage rates. Typically, most people get like a 30-year mortgage, for example, but most banks don't want to sit around and wait for you to pay them back over that 30-year period. So what they do is they package these loans and sell them as a pool of loans, and actually they get converted into a bond. So they get sold in the bond market as mortgage bonds. And that way the bank can get their money right away, and then the loan becomes an instrument that is traded as a security, a bond security, right? So mortgage rates are more directly affected by bonds. And what's happening now, because the stock market is taking a hit, as you've seen now with all the news about the coronavirus, for example, people are panicking. A lot of people are selling their stocks. But typically when people sell their stocks, they have to put that money somewhere. So either they go to cash or you move over to bonds, which can be safe if you buy, for example, U.S. Treasuries, and they also generate some interest. And that has a direct relationship to mortgage rates. So right now, as people sell their stocks and buy bonds, it's actually making mortgage rates lower than they have been in the past 3 years, which are closer to their 50-year low.
Okay. And so how does a mortgage refinance work? Is it like refinancing a personal loan or a car loan?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same concept. It's a little bit more involved sometimes because the property is involved. So for example, you have to get the house appraised because the bank wants to make sure, obviously, that the home has enough value for you to refinance your mortgage. So the process is a little bit more involved. You have to get your credit checked, either call your bank or walk into a bank or your mortgage broker, apply for it, get the property appraised. Some banks, depending on the loan program, you may or may not require an appraisal, but for the most part, they would. And normally you pay for that out of pocket. But ultimately, that is the same concept. And you have to decide whether or not you want to refinance to either lower your interest rate or perhaps shorten the term of your mortgage. So sometimes, if you did a 30-year mortgage initially, you might want to change that to a 20-year or a 15-year, things of that sort.
And so are those all the different types of refinance options?
Yes. One of them is called rate and term, or rate or term. So you can lower your interest rate. You can change the term. So if you have a 30, you can go down to a 20 or 15-year. The other kind would be what's called a cash out refinance, where let's say you owe $200,000 on your mortgage and you have enough equity in your house. A lot of people then borrow more than they currently owe in order to take cash out of their house. And that could be done for a whole lot of reasons. Like, let's say you got married, you have a kid, baby on the way, you need an extra room in your house. You might want to refinance to make that kind of home improvement or get a home equity line of credit, for example. And people borrow then to then improve the home, expand it, add some square footage. Some people borrow to consolidate other debt that they might have or pay off a lower mortgage balance on an investment property, for example, because typically you get a better rate on your primary residence than you would on an investment. So there are a lot of reasons why somebody would refinance. So it's mostly either to lower your payment, to take some cash out, or a combination of the two.
And so when does it actually make sense for someone to refinance an existing loan?
Well, very good question. As a rule of thumb, obviously, people might think that, all right, well, if I'm saving money on my monthly payment, then it makes sense to do. And that is not necessarily the case. I'm going to give you an example. I have a current client of mine who called me up and said, hey, I heard rates are low. Does it make sense for me to refinance at this moment? So let me give you some rough numbers based on his scenario, just so that you have an idea. So he purchased the house 10 years ago. It was $250,000 with 20% down. So the loan amount was $200,000. Right now, he has a balance of about $160,000. His monthly principal and interest payment, the interest rate at the time was 4.5%, is $1,013.37, not including taxes and insurance, because I just want to compare mortgage to make it simpler. So right now, if he was to refinance into another 30-year mortgage at 3.5%, so he's dropping an entire percent, his mortgage payment will be $754 as opposed to $1,013, which off the bat, you're saving $259 a month, which sounds kind of cool. But what I told him was one thing to consider is the fact that now he's resetting the clock by starting with a brand new 30-year mortgage again. So now that home that he bought in 2010, he won't have it paid off until 2050, right? Because he's doing the 10 years plus another 30 on top of that. So he's adding an extra 10 years to his house. Now, the other thing that I mentioned to him, I said, here's another option. Instead of saving so much money per month and starting over on a brand new 30-year mortgage, you could also shorten the term of the mortgage that you have or refinance, for example, into a 20-year mortgage. So if he did a 20-year loan right now, his payment will go down by $60. It doesn't really sound as juicy to refinance just for a $60 savings, right? Because he has 20 years left on his mortgage anyway. But when you consider the fact that he's going to save a lot more money in interest, right? Now, the other option that I said, well, you might even take it a step further, maybe do a 15-year mortgage. Right now, he has 20 years left on his loan. He can refinance into a 15-year and basically cut 5 years out of his mortgage payments, which right now it would actually increase his payment a little bit. But the benefit over time of cutting 5 years out of the loan, even with an increased payment, I mean, we're talking about like over $34,000. So the question is a broad one because I feel like it's very specific to individuals. And this is where a financial planner can really help you make those kinds of decisions like, well, here's my loan amount, here's what I pay, here's my interest rate. Does it make sense for me to refinance? And if so, what should I do? Should I do another 30-year, 20-year, 15-year? Should I take some cash out? And if so, what am I going to use this money for if you have that kind of need, et cetera? And because sometimes people might get into a situation where it might not make sense to take some cash out. You know, some people might just take cash out to pay credit cards and their overall monthly payment goes down, but then they just started a brand new 30-year mortgage. And over the lifetime, they're actually going to pay more interest and they're putting their house more at risk because now they're increasing their balance, right? So it's one of the things that you should really consider talking to a financial planner about, not just necessarily the bank that's going to sell you the loan because they're not looking at your overall financial picture. They're just looking at, oh, well, yeah, you could lower your rate, lower your payment. It's a good opportunity, which may make sense in the now, but you need to sit down with somebody that's going to look at your overall comprehensive situation and make sure that you make the right choice for yourself. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Well, thank you. So for someone who is not already a homeowner, so they're not looking to refinance, they're looking to just buy a new house, what would be the benefit of that in a lower interest rate environment?
Yeah, well, the benefit immediately is, I look at it two ways. So if you were going to buy a $300,000 house and that was your price range before rates drop, now you can afford a $325,000 house for the same monthly payment. That's one way of looking at it. So maybe if you were buying, say, new construction, you could afford to do those upgrades that you thought you couldn't do before, or you could just move up slightly in the type of home that you want, maybe in a different area, et cetera. Or you can look at it from the standpoint of, well, I can get to the same exact house that I wanted before for less of a monthly payment. So that's the way I kind of look at it. So you're either going to save money monthly or you could afford more of a home as a result of rates being lower. So it's a little less of a calculation to do, obviously, than if you already had a mortgage, because now it's just, do I want to buy more property for the same amount of money that I was willing to spend before, or do I just want to buy the same exact amount of property that I wanted before and just save that money? And maybe you can use the difference to add to an IRA or your 401k at work, et cetera.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so I've heard the term points when referring to mortgage rates. What is that exactly?
Points are basically prepaid interest. 1 point is 1% of your loan amount. So if somebody's borrowing a $300,000 mortgage, 1 point is $3,000. And basically what the banks typically will allow you to do is to pay points in order to lower your interest rate. So to give you an example, you might walk into a bank today that tells you, look, your interest rate right now, if you were to lock in your rate, would be 3.5%. However, if you want to pay us 1 point, which is $3,000, we can actually lower that rate from 3.5 to 3.25. So you would save that 0.25% initially on your rate for the remainder of that loan term. So it's a basic, simple calculation. You have to say, well, how much money will I save by paying down $3,000 today and getting a 3.25% interest rate versus a 3.5? And you just have to do a break-even analysis. So if it might be, let's say, 5 years in monthly savings before you recoup that $3,000 initial investment, right? So if you're going to stay in the house for 30 years, you would save for the next 25, which will probably save you thousands of dollars in interest. So it might make sense for a lot of people to consider that as well, buying the rate down.
Okay. And so what are some resources that people can utilize in order to help them decide if refinancing a mortgage is a good option for them with their specific circumstances?
There are some online calculators. I'm going to put them in the show notes. I'm going to mention them here as well. One of them is bankrate.com and also NerdWallet. They have a really good calculator. So if you have an existing mortgage, you can plug in your current information and see kind of like what the difference would be. And it'll show you how much interest you'll save over the life of the loan, refinancing versus adding extra payments and things of that sort. But what I feel like people should really do is sit down with somebody that can advise them into whether or not this makes sense for them, because a mortgage calculator is only going to spit out based on the information that you're putting in. And again, it's only comparing mortgage to mortgage, not looking at your overall financial situation. You know, there are times where I've sat down with a client where it did not make sense to refinance. Sometimes it just makes sense to send extra payments to the mortgage, because you have to consider there are also closing costs involved. And for the most part, you either have to finance those costs out of pocket, or you have to finance them into the loan and thereby increasing your existing loan balance. And then we have to see if it still makes sense for you to refinance, because now you're adding to that balance, right? So the resources will be some online calculators, but I highly recommend that you sit down with a financial planner that can tell you if refinancing or buying a house is in your best interest.
That's awesome. And I think that you would be the best financial planner for people to sit down with, just, you know, in my unbiased opinion.
Your unbiased opinion. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I think that's really great information. And I'm really happy that you had me be part of the show today. And I look forward to participating in more in the future.
You absolutely will. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. Also, if you have an idea or a question for the show or anybody that you'd like for me to interview, please let me know. And obviously, this is for informational purposes only. Be sure to consult with your financial planner, your tax advisor, et cetera, before making any decisions for yourself. Thank you. We'll see you in the next show.
Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Send Luis an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. To read the show notes and the blog, please visit www.onmywaytowealth.com. Luis Rosa is an investment advisor representative of Retirement Wealth Advisors, Inc., an SEC-registered investment advisor. Build a Better Financial Future and Retirement Wealth Advisors are not affiliated. Exposure to ideas and financial vehicles discussed should not be considered investment advice or recommendation to buy or sell any financial vehicle. This information should not be considered tax or legal advice. Individuals should consult with the professionals specializing in the fields of tax, legal, accounting, or investments regarding the applicability of this information for their situation. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Investments will fluctuate and when redeemed, may be worth more or less than when originally invested.